Hello. Hello. Thanks for joining us on the panel. I'm, relative to this panel, working on a book that's sort of like an Oakland-ish history of Silicon Valley. So focuses on homelessness, environmental justice, labor, and so I could not be more excited to have this panel. So often it feels like homelessness is an intractable problem, and we have people here who may not feel optimistic that we're going to get to the solutions, but at least may be able to tell us something about our options. I want to start with Dr. Kushel to begin. She's directing a $30 million initiative based on a donation by Mark Benioff to research homelessness. And for those in the city who were here when it came out, there was some criticism about, well, why doesn't this money just go right into services on the street? So what don't we know about homelessness that we need to study? Why do we need this initiative?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it's a fair question. Why not just put it towards housing or services? Very fair question. I would say that we believe that the problem is solvable. I think the only way we're not going to solve it is if we think it's not solvable. And the scale of the problem nationally is on many, many, many billions of dollars. And we want to make sure that A, that money is spent, and B, it's spent well. I think that we do know first of all, we know what causes homelessness. Poverty and racism cause homelessness. The lack of affordable housing causes homelessness. We don't actually need to study that. But I think we do know, we do know most of what we need to know to solve it, but I think around the edges, particularly around the alignment of services to housing, there are a lot of questions. And I have been going around the last few months talking to the people who are making these decisions, and I get a lot of skepticism at first. And then I say, we're here to help you. What is it that you don't know that if you knew, you could do your job better? And then I'm like overwhelmed with the questions, and I think, God, I'm not going to be able to answer those for $30 million. I think there still are things we don't know. We know that permanent supportive housing works. It works really well. 85% of chronically homeless people, even those with really bad disabling conditions who enter permanent supportive housing, are housed stably. The thing we don't know is A, who are those other 15% and what do they need? B, there's a wide range of service deliveries that go with permanent supportive housing, and we're doing a really not an optimal job of figuring out who needs what level of services, who needs, as we sometimes say, the Mercedes, and who needs a Toyota. How do you know that up front? We know that there are a lot of things that work in the moment to prevent homelessness. At a moment of crisis, we're really bad at targeting those. And so right now we know, for instance, from this great study in Chicago, small grants, $750 on average, had a 76% reduction in homelessness. The issue was it was only a 1.6% absolute reduction. Most of the people who didn't get the money didn't become homeless anyway. We need to scale that solution to be able to target that, to figure out who's likely to become homeless, for whom would a $750 one-time payment end their homelessness or have it never start. Obviously, if we could do that, I think we would all want to do that. I think there is a lot of questions around special populations, around the aging of the homeless population. How do we allow people with a lot of behavioral health disabilities to age in place and not go to nursing homes? We think that this problem is solvable, but we think we're going to need to move the ship in this country on the order of many billions of dollars, and we want to be sure, A, that people understand that it's solvable, B, understands what it will take to solve it and are willing to solve it, and C, know that that money will be well spent.
Yeah. There's some news today that there's an attempt to build a kind of a safe parking lot for people who are living out of their vehicles out by the Balboa Park BART station. And one of the things that's so interesting is there's been this kind of tremendous rise in people living in their vehicles. And I kind of want to use it as a way of understanding the panel's perspective on some of these issues. From where you sit, Joe, what has caused this rise, not just in the specific mode of homelessness?
Well, I don't think any single thing has caused it, but I think that Margot was very eloquent in laying out kind of the different aspects of the problem that we need to be aware of. But I would say that at a certain point, it seems like we do have enough information to act on something. And I would push back gently to say that on a local level, the investment needs to be in the billions of dollars.
Yeah.
At the national level, you're talking about at least $1 trillion to get us started in the right direction. You know, a national public works program, housing as a human right, enshrined in the Constitution. I mean, there are things that we could move toward. I think at the local level, in terms of people sleeping out of their vehicles, I don't know that that's a new phenomenon. I think we're paying more attention to it because it's obviously more visible, but it is just another piece of evidence that the crisis is deepening. More and more people have fewer and fewer options in terms of identifying a way out. San Francisco has a finite amount of land area in which to construct housing, so we need to be building the right kind of housing, and housing that's affordable to people with very low incomes is the housing that we need. And I am not one of those who believes that all housing is equal, because it isn't.
Yeah.
I think that and we have to also be acting with a race and equity lens.
Yeah.
And to date, we have not done that. We also need to link housing to jobs. I think that study after study, our recent point-in-time count showed us that 1 in 4 homeless people list loss of a job as the primary cause of their homelessness. And if we're having a panel about shared prosperity, we need to talk about how we're investing or not investing in a workforce that can actually afford housing costs. And so that leads us to looking at people sleeping in their vehicles as homes that they don't have and can't afford in the Bay Area, which other studies show that the Bay Area has, I think, 5 of the 7 most expensive counties in the country right here. And so we know that the scale of our solution has not matched the scale of the problem. We need to do a much better job at that.
Feng, why don't you, teed you up on the labor side.
Yes, thanks, Joe. Your fun jobs. So, I've been talking to a lot of gig workers, Uber, Lyft drivers. They're driving in from Sacramento, Fresno, Bakersfield to come here and work for a few days and sleep in their cars and shower in the gym, right? A cheap gym. So there's a real link between jobs and housing that we need to make. And also, there's people who are living in substandard housing, who are crowded in SROs, a whole family. I think this is just a piece of it, the RV question, right? And there's actually also, 1 in 20 San Franciscans who make above 500K, right? So, and it's not even about these people, right? It's about an economic structure that produces these outcomes. It's about income inequality. It's about racial inequality. And we have to address that. We have to address some of the root causes and not just symptoms.
Yeah.
And I'd say with that too is, one, thank you for letting me come from my unaffordable city to this unaffordable city as well. It's really interesting. So from the Seattle Planning Commission's perspective, we're an independent advisory board, so we're volunteers, we're not city employees. But one thing we did when we conducted our study is we identified one thing that was really critical, which is, although it's important to provide housing opportunities for everyone, whether that's renting or home ownership, you don't gain equity from renting. And that's one of the critical factors that goes into making sure that we have the ability to gain wealth, pass it on to our future generations, and give them the same opportunities. And it is steeped in racial inequities and our history of it. And it's been very painful to accept, but it's important to acknowledge and be accountable for.
Why don't we have more of a public option for housing? I mean, we know there obviously people have built public housing in the past. Some of it has gone well, some of it has not. There have been changes in the system. But that seems like a way that we were able to house tons of people during World War II. I mean, this has worked in other countries. Do you see that as part of the solution here in San Francisco, or a large part of the solution?
Yes, it has to be. I think one of the problems at the national level, we have a gifted neurosurgeon. Which does not solve our problem. And there are other aspects of it as well. So we have more than 8 million households in the United States that live in substandard housing, that pay more than 50% of their monthly income in rent and receive no housing subsidy. We have a country where 4 million plus people, including 2 million children, subsist on incomes of $2 per person per day. We have entire states Mississippi, for example, which may as well be a fourth world country in the United States. We have in so many leadership positions, particularly in this administration, we have the exact wrong people in charge. Over the past quarter century, we have essentially gutted our government infrastructure. The Environmental Protection Agency, for example, does not conduct safety inspections on a variety of things. We're approving drugs that we know will kill our children. And I think at a certain point, if we're not prepared to invest to the scale of the problem, we're going to be having more and more forums like this trying to talk about what we need to do. First and foremost, we need to really have a top-down redesign of how we envision prosperity in this country. It has to start in impoverished communities. A race and equity lens has to be front and center to those investments. Yeah. And we have to, in San Francisco, right, we've, our public housing authority is defunct, right? So we're not going to have a public housing authority. We will have people on waiting lists who were due to receive housing subsidies and won't because we have no infrastructure for that. We're going to have to reinvest in that. So at each decision intersect point, yeah, we're either making the wrong decision, we have the wrong person there, or we have failed to enlist all of the partners that we need to enlist to make sure that we are investing to the scale of the problem.
I think it's worth noting that before 1980, we did do much more of this, and there were dramatic cuts in the federal spend on affordable housing that have never been restored, so that right now nationally there are 35 units of housing affordable and available for every 100 households who make less than 30% of the area median income, which you call extremely low income. California, we have 22 units available for every 100 households, and then we wonder why there's a homelessness crisis. It's like the game of musical chairs where someone keeps pulling out the chairs. And so it's not just affordable housing, it's deeply affordable housing, and it's not just housing, but it's jobs. I mean, the affordable housing is both how much the housing costs and how much the household income is, and those two things have to match.
Yeah. What do you think Prop C, where does it fit? Is that Band-Aid or more of like something that starts to tilt into solving some of these deeper issues?
If you got a cut, you need a Band-Aid. I think that,
right. I think that's fair.
Right. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
I think doubling the investment that we're currently making to combat homelessness is a good thing. Yeah. And it gets us started in the right direction. I do think the tech industry has to do some soul searching here about its actual commitment to tackling this problem. From their own workplace practices that perpetuate discrimination and income disparity with black and brown people and women at the bottom. Everyone else at the top, there's a 6-to-1 wage disparity between direct jobs in the tech industry and subcontracted workforce. You can commit to better workplace standards yourselves as employers. You can commit to better codes of conduct and hiring practices by your subcontractors. You can commit to redesigning your employment practices to start with a race and equity lens. And you can say next time that there is a proposal to tax the tech industry a little bit to create a bigger pie. I mean, to have a bigger pie, you need more dough. So I think that, I think there's an opportunity for the tech industry to behave better in terms of accomplishing shared prosperity.
Yeah. Michael, why don't you fill us in on Seattle's experience trying to tax the tech industry?
That's a good question. That's actually I would say that is out of the scope of the Planning Commission. That's quite a topic, and that could go on for quite a long time. But I can say, in terms of, when we look at housing affordability and touching on those aspects, what really is kind of striking is the fact that when we look at Seattle as a whole, we looked at all the land capacity that was zoned for residential uses. Of that, when we did our total study, it was 75% of our lands that are dedicated for residential uses are single-family zones. Yet over the last 10 years of development, only 5% of growth has actually occurred within those single-family areas. So much of the growth has actually been concentrated in our urban centers, urban villages. Much were actually previously redlined communities on there. And so when we look at the types of units that are being constructed in Seattle, very few of them are even family-size housing. So, we can talk about affordability aspects, but, then it goes on more. It compounds on itself. What are those family-size housing opportunities that we want to provide to keep people and future generations in our city?
We've been talking a lot about the need to really make structural reform. And so I want to go down the line, kind of starting here. Kind of what's the most radical thing that you would do that would help to fix not just homelessness, but the sort of broader affordability crisis?
Well, a quick one is the tech industry is generous, but not generous enough, and we need not donations or charity, but taxes. Like, we need publicly accountable money. We need to have money that is up to us to decide how to spend. So that's one quick one. But another side of that is for workers. And for workers, this is radical in some ways, but it's also true, is that workers need to have a voice on the job. They need to have power. They need to be able to tilt this economy that is out of whack and bring back some equitable economy that has shared prosperity that works for everyone.
Mm-hmm. I'd say with it too, as there's a line that I always think about, and it's, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so from that perspective, you need to make sure that there are voices from all communities present in making decisions and being able to actually have the power to transform that change. And that means leading with a racial equity lens. And that's not actually, I don't think, a crazy strategy. It's something that we're all accepted and moving forward, and it's a little bit messy because it's not a perfect process, but we need to continue to work and be accountable for moving that forward.
Since you're asking to think big, I probably won't make many friends here, but I would think hard about the amount of federal money we spend on the mortgage interest tax deduction and reinvest that in affordable housing. I like to start panels by explaining that I live in subsidized housing, and you can see the audience kind of looking at me and thinking, oh, wow, you didn't know that, and it's because I own my house, and so I get this huge tax deduction. Now, in what world would I get a subsidy and my patients at San Francisco General be living on the street? So if you're thinking big, I would think like that.
Yeah, it's hard to say where to start, but I think a national public works program spread out over 25 years, led by our own Army Corps of Engineers. Every time we go overseas and blow up a black or brown country, we send in our Army Corps of Engineers to rebuild the place that we just blew up. So we can build recreation centers, housing, we can build hospitals, playgrounds, childcare centers in our own country. We can put people to work in the process, and so I would say at least that to start, and then housing has to be viewed as a public good, not a business commodity. And so that means addressing the fundamental income disparities and inequality that are intrinsic to capitalism.
Yeah. And I think, I got to answer this one myself too, just because a wealth tax feels like something that has to come in the 21st century. I mean, 0.1% having the same amount of wealth as the bottom 90% is just bonkers. And as long as that plus historical segregation and continuing segregation, it's like we're going to get the situation that we have. Let's take some questions from the audience. Right here and then right there. Oh, that's fine. We'll do it in this order.
Hi, my name is Sima Lieberman. I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant and a podcaster on race. My question, I love this panel. And my question for you is, what do you think about the best way to be able to involve all stakeholders in this? Because I see so often people say, well, they're building, they're doing this, they're doing that, but are you involving everybody in the community? Are you involving people who are homeless, who are formerly homeless, to share best practices and what people really need? And in my opinion, I could be wrong, but I don't think that there's enough time spent asking people. I mean, I have a friend who's homeless right now, and she got homeless because she couldn't afford the $30 a month rent, and she works full time, but she's living shelter to shelter. And she said, how come nobody ever asks me?
Joe, you want to take that one, or?
Sir, I'm formerly homeless, and I'm leading a $5 million organization. I'm leading the organization I used to sleep at. I think that first and foremost, you ask people and then you listen.
Yep.
And you make the effort to engage people. Simple as that. If you're serious about it, the effort is worth it. If you're not, it isn't. And I think we have our own experience in our organization. We have formerly homeless people on our board of directors. Formerly homeless person is the executive director, me. It is possible, it is necessary, and it's transformative for the individual organization, and it makes a marker on the field how we can behave ourselves when we're critiquing other sectors in terms of their behavior. We have to model the behavior that we want others to emulate. That's the start of asking people and then listening.
If you don't center the people who are experiencing it and involve them in every aspect of what you're doing, not only are you wrong, but you're going to come up with the wrong answers.
Mm-hmm. I'd say with it too, with it too is the Race and Social Justice Initiative of the City of Seattle identifies something called the Cultural Competency Continuum, and on there it does identify specific tools for outreach and engagement that do fall lower on the rungs than others for inclusion and engagement, and surprisingly, town halls are very low on there. So what a shock that people don't feel comfortable coming to a city hall forum where people end up projecting and being very loud and boisterous at those meetings. So.
I just want to sharpen the point on inclusion versus power, right?
Yeah.
Prop C passed. Prop C passed with a majority of people voting, led by formerly homeless people, and now it's being held hostage by these right-wing anti-taxers, right? That's not democratic. That's not actually listening to the people who are affected, coming up with solutions, right? So we need to look at taxes, we need to look at voting, we need to look at our democratic practices, and sometimes the tech industry actually has a responsibility in very anti-democratic practices.
Let's get this question in right here if I can. Oh. No, I'm trying to come to you. We'll go quick on this next.
My name's Rosemary Nam. I'm a concerned citizen and volunteer in the community, and I have a question about homelessness. So I applaud all of you for being so concerned and being part of solving the problem. And I love all of the big ideas, but I personally, and I am all for taxes, but I am, like many of us, I'm sure in this room, frustrated that we're not taking incremental steps to solve it. I love all of your big ideas, but we need to get, for me, we need to have fewer homeless people that we're almost stepping over in the city, literally, so inhumanely. And why are we not taking some incremental steps like establishing tent camp cities, areas where cities own, lots that cities own, allow established tent camps to have people live there while we find housing for them, while we build housing for them. Trillions and billions of dollars are not going to be readily available tomorrow. We all know that. There's a lot of politics involved. Another idea.
So look, can I stop you there just because
Yeah.
I want to give them a chance to answer before we run out of time?
RVs. Why don't we use parking lots to have organized RV lots and have toilets and so forth as an interim step?
Interim steps, then.
I'm all for interim steps, and I'm all for incrementalism. And I think one of the challenges that we have faced in terms of incrementalism is that we take a baby step and then we stop.
Yeah.
And I think we need to keep moving, right? And so, yes, I agree. We should not be arresting people and throwing away people's belongings and then selling it ourselves in our own city departments. That is inexcusable behavior. That's one. We're spending $20+ million a year on enforcing these quality of life offenses that are not crimes but infractions and clog up our court and jail system, and we actually shackle people with these civil assessments and bench warrants that then make it that much harder for them to access benefits to actually get out of their homelessness situation. So I think incrementalism is fine. Our small organization or mid-sized organization, we run an emergency shelter that we've run for 37 years. We have a community arts program that celebrates the arts and creativity for people. We're the only free fine arts studio for low-income and homeless artists in San Francisco, Hospitality House Community Arts Program. We have 2 self-help centers that are entry points to the behavioral health system so we can get people moving along a path of recovery and reconnection. And then we have an employment program that focuses on homeless job seekers, getting them gainful employment, seeking better practices by employers. So we're actually hiring people to enable them to make progress in their lives. All of these are smaller scale efforts that can be replicated elsewhere.
Joe, I'm going to give you the final. Well, okay, fine. We're going to get there, but got to make it really fast.
My name is Richard Ezeki. I'm with the Urban Institute, working on using data to better promote opportunities for people in cities. I'm curious about the political implications. That is an article that I think there was a recent bill that to pass affordable housing in California that was shut down, and it got a lot of pushback from what they call wealthy progressives, right? And so we're seeing, the challenge I see with affordable housing is that you have people from both sides of the spectrum who are pushing back on this. So I'm really curious to hear some of your thoughts on how we can politically make affordable housing possible when you have people who, from both sides of the political spectrum, who have a certain class pushing back. Can you talk a little about that? I would love to hear your comments.
Who wants to take it?
Well, I have one that relates to the other question too, which is, for me, I think about non-reformist reforms. And some of it is just keeping people in the homes that they already have.
Yeah.
So very quickly, rent control, just cause eviction. We need to strengthen those, we need to extend those. And building off what you said, I think it's not just about building housing, any kind of housing. That was part of the debate that I think Joe said. And housing is not all equal. We need to make sure that the housing being built is actually affordable.
Awesome. All right, that's the final word. Thank you so much.